So for our internal ghU, we're gonna have Nyari and Sara give us a ghU. And for just to break the ice a little bit, Nyari is recommending Billie Eilish for her Spotify Wrapped 2020, and then Sara is recommending T Grizzly. Or sorry, vice versa. Nyari is recommending T Grizzly, and then Sara is recommending Billie Eilish. All right, so Sara and Nyari, the floor is yours.
Wait, should we like share screen and present? Oh, okay, good. I was
If
like,
you
I'm
guys want to share
not on my
screen, you
laptop.
can, but I can also share.
Can you do it? Because I'm actually on my phone, so that would be like so much easier. Okay, cool. So for our ghU, we are talking about Eastern and Western medicine and how the two could possibly be integrated. So for positionality and land acknowledgement, my name is Nyari, and I currently live in Fresno, California, which is the land of the Yokuts and the Mono tribes, and I identify as an African American female.
For my positionality and land acknowledgement, my name is Sara, and I'm currently on the land of the Muwekma Alone tribe. I'm sorry if I'm butchering that, by the way. And I identify as a Caucasian female.
So what are Eastern and Western medicine? Eastern medicine is focused on holistic approaches to medicine and looks at the body and like its entirety in comparison to Western medicine, which is focused on simply treating your symptoms through the use of drugs, radiation or surgery. So in terms of Eastern medicine, it studies your physical and mental issues and how they may be in conflict and causing like an underlying medical issue. Oh, you can go to the next slide. So Western medicine is sometimes referred to as allopathic or conventional medicine, and its primary focus is to identify and treat specific conditions so that the patient can recover, and is often called the reductionist method. So it assumes that all medical issues can be reduced to a simple issue within the body and treated with a physical solution. In terms of Eastern medicine, there are 5 major practices for Eastern medicine, and that includes acupuncture, Chinese herbal medicine, Oriental nutrition and dietary therapy, Tuna or Oriental bodywork, and then Tai Chi or Qigong, which is mind, body, spirit practices. So essentially, these 5 traditions are focused on unblocking your chi and kind of facilitating a better flow between the functions of your mind and the body itself. So it helps to put your yin and yang back in balance so that it may treat whatever medical issue you have.
Okay, I'm gonna talk a little bit specifically about the practices of Eastern medicine. So the first one is obviously acupuncture. I'm pretty sure that some of us have experienced this. I experienced it once and it was actually a really cool and interesting experience, so I highly recommend it. But it's basically where you put small needles through the skin at certain points, and it's supposed to help with fluid flow and chronic muscle pain. And the second one is moxibustion. This is one that's not so common. It's the burning of herbs and applying them to certain pressure points of the body. And once again, this is supposed to kind of unblock your chi and be really useful for calming the body and its muscles. Next slide, please. And then we have herbal medicine. So this is basically using herbs as a soothing factor for the body. So one thing that people do is they take herbs and they like boil them in water, and then the person who's usually feeling a little sick inhales the steam, and that's supposed to be really therapeutic, and it really helps with things like migraines. And then also tunai, which is a Chinese therapeutic massage, and that one's also really useful in loosening the muscles. Next slide, please. And then the last two I'm going to talk about are dietary therapy and Tai Chi, Qigong, and yoga. So dietary therapy is what it sounds like. It's basically eating food that nourishes your body and improves your health. In Western medicine, there's not as much of a focus on that. But obviously, if you have a good diet, it really helps with maintaining your body and maintaining all its functions. And then we have Tai Chi, Qigong, and yoga, which is basically mind-body exercises that use breathing, stretching, and meditation to kind of, once again, restore that balance that Nyari was talking about. Next slide.
So this is just to look at the two in comparison. So you can think of Eastern medicine in terms of looking at the body's software, while Western medicine is focused on looking at the body's hardware. So Eastern medicine really focuses on homeopathic remedies that Sarah was just talking about, and it tries to find a link between the mental and your physical health to fix any disharmony that may exist between your bodily organs. And then, so by kind of unblocking your chi and freeing the flow of like between the mind and the body, it helps to engage in the body's ability to heal and kind of fix itself naturally. Whereas Western medicine involves synthetic drugs and pharmaceuticals. So we are very much focused on using prescription drugs to fix and treat our symptoms. So we have specialists, whereas Eastern medicine, it's like the doctor looks at your body as a whole and how to connect the mind and the body to each other. Whereas Western medicine, you have a specialist for each part of your body, and that specialist focuses on only fixing that one area. So Western medicine looks at the brain as an organ, whereas Eastern medicine looks at it as like a garden that's trying to nurture your body and trying to like keep us healthy. And so Western medicine does not look at long-term health. It kind of is fixing your symptoms for that moment in time. And then if you have issues later on, you go back and see the doctor again, versus Eastern medicine, where the doctor actually will track your progress and keep like tabs on you to make sure that the remedies that they prescribed are actually working. And then, so for your first breakout room, we have a couple questions for you to consider. Do you see any of these differences between Eastern and Western medicine in your own life? And do you have any experience with Eastern or Western medicine? And have you seen any attempts to combine the two practices? So does anyone have anything that they would like to share concerning these questions?
I could start. So my breakout group was talking about how like a lot of these Eastern medicine practices are culturally related for each of us, and you know, like even if you could prove that this is a pseudoscience or it has like a placebo effect in your feeling of healing, if it's still making you feel better, if it's making you feel like you are feeling better, and you do feel better, I still believe that that's working. And if it's a way to connect to your culture and, you know, like see the logic behind why your ancestors thought that this worked, whether you see the connection between the practice and the effect it has, it's still meaningful.
For the question about like combining Eastern and Western medicine, we were kind of talking about how like growing up, my parents would always tell me to like if I was like sick or something, they'd tell me to take Advil, and then they'd give me like Vicks Vapor Rub, which I guess is like an Indian like smelly gel thing, and it was like
Yeah, Vicks.
I don't know, it worked. It was kind of funny.
Yeah, I used to get that a lot too. Like for everything, it would just put it on your chest and you go to sleep. And like sometimes you add a humidifier and it literally like fixes everything. So we're probably gonna move on to the next slide now.
Okay, I'm gonna talk a little bit about the history and origin of Eastern medicine. But before doing that, I wanted to add on to a point that someone else made a couple seconds ago. So they said that it was a way to connect with your culture. I think Bernie said that. And that's actually a really good point, because when me and Nyari were researching this, like kids are Eastern medicine people who grow up with a very Eastern way of life. They are taught these ways of medicine from the moment that they are born. So it's like very ingrained within them. And so, yeah, it's a really important way to like connect with your culture. But moving on to that, the history and origin of Eastern or holistic medicine, it's actually the oldest system of medicine in the world. And it originated in Asia, and it actually started in Egypt, and then it slowly spread to like areas like China. And as of 2015, 60% of people practice some form of it. Next slide. And then the history and origin of Western medicine. So the ancient Greeks were actually the first to look at the body from a very human biological perspective. And Hippocrates of Kos is known as the father of Western medicine because he had very scientific descriptions of the body and diseases and how to treat them. And this actually surprised me, but it became globalized among practitioners in World War II, which that's a little later than I expected. But next slide.
So some issues that we have seen when trying to integrate both Eastern and Western medicine together is that a lot of Eastern countries are hesitant to integrate Western medicine and vice versa. We see that countries that practice Eastern medicine who believe in homeopathic remedies do not want to implement Western medicine because we are very much focused on using drugs from pharmaceutical companies. So their main critiques are that since we use pharmaceutical companies, medicine is more focused on monetary value. So pharmaceutical companies that are able to produce things such as insulin for $4, then put it on the market for $150 versus Eastern medicine, which is holistic. So they have cheaper options. So the main issue is just whether we should use more homeopathic remedies or synthetic drugs to treat our symptoms. Oh, we can go to the next slide. Sorry, I didn't even say it. Okay, so we just had one, but we have another breakout room. So we're going to give you this scenario, and the question you have to answer is, how would practitioners of Eastern and Western medicine, based on Dolores' symptoms, create a treatment plan? So Dolores is a 34-year-old married mother in Miami who has 3 children. She recently lost her job and is stressed about her family being able to pay bills. She needs a new job, but knows that she lacks the skills that will make her competitive in the job market. She's unable to sleep well and starts to have arguments with her husband, which make her feel worse. She's also been overeating and spends a large portion of her day on social media instead of actively looking for a new job. Eventually, she just spends as much time in bed as possible. Her husband definitely notices her mood changes and suggests that she should see a doctor. She knows she has the option of seeing either Dr. West or Dr. East, and the 2 doctors are very smart people, but they have different approaches to treatment. So how do you think each doctor would treat Dolores' symptoms based on what we have talked about? So does anyone have anything they would like to share?
Well, I can share what our my breakout room kind of talked about, and it was like a really interesting perspective because we felt that honestly neither would be able to really create an effective treatment plan because from a Western medicine perspective, we would probably expect them to treat a lot of what seems like not like this seems like a kind of like a stress problem, a lack of ability to focus, and a Western doctor would probably prescribe antidepressants or some kind of very reductionist approach to a problem that shouldn't be taken like that. But at the same time, from an Eastern medicine doctor's perspective, it there's definitely not an emphasis on mental health and kind of problems in that realm in Eastern culture. And it can definitely be disregarded as her being lazy, and maybe the doctor won't really take her problem seriously. And what was I gonna say? Oh yeah. I mean, maybe they could like recommend meditation or Tai Chi, but again, Bernie was actually saying and Alice that really those aren't treatment methods, though that's a way of life, and they wouldn't really be able to come up with a plan, and they would probably disregard her obstacles that she's facing.
Yeah, and like also just to kind of add going off of that, like the treatment method that kind of came to mind for me was like related to hospice care. I don't know if anyone knows about hospice, but like it's basically you get a team of people to take care of you as opposed to just a singular doctor, and it's usually given to individuals that are near the end of their life. So you get like a social worker, you get a spiritual like counselor, you get your nurses, your caretakers, and I think just like having a team of people taking care of an individual, especially in this situation, like you know, having like a social worker helping her find a job, having like a spiritual bereavement, like spiritual person, like helping her like maybe figure it out in a different light, as opposed to just like kind of like maybe like finding it within her religion or something. So just finding a team of people, I think, would help her more than just giving her pills, like Pernille said, or helping her with like Tai Chi, which may be a more long-term situation.
Yeah, I totally agree with all of those. Those are great points. And before we had actually done this, Sarah and I had not actually addressed the cultural difference that Neil was talking about earlier, about how Eastern medicine and Eastern practices do not necessarily focus on mental health as well. So that was just very interesting to hear you guys talk about. You can go to the next slide.
Okay, so actually kind of related to the case scenario that we had, the ideal way, believed by many, to treat Dolores's problem is obviously by integration of both methods. So Eastern and Western medicine, even though people see them as two very separate entities, they can actually really come together in a really cool way. So some examples of that is how traditional Chinese medicine can actually really alleviate the symptoms of certain prescription drugs and painkillers. And acupuncture also works alongside medication to decrease like symptoms of the flu and seasonal illnesses like that. And then acupuncture, qigong, and herbal therapy, they decrease the side effects of, for example, chemotherapy. And so Eastern and Western medicine, even though people see them as kind of like a versus scenario, which is kind of how like me and Nyari were viewing them when we first made the presentation, they can actually work really well together. Next slide. So speaking of integration, I'm going to talk about one way that they've actually been integrated right now, which is super cool. So scientists have actually discovered something called the interstitium, and it's basically a network of fluid-filled spaces, and they line the body and tissues of the body. And it's really interesting because before, scientists believe that organs and layers under the skin were lined with collagen, but actually the interstitium is believed to be a whole separate organ that lines a lot of the tissues in our body. And it acts as a highway for kind of lymphatic fluid passage. And scientists are really digging deep into this new discovery and taking really Western approaches into seeing like how prescription drugs affect the interstitium. And fun fact, the interstitium actually comprises 20% of our body mass, while the skin occupies only 16%. So it's a pretty large part. Next slide.
So we see that water and lymphatic fluid is what is being stored in the interstitium, and this is essential to bodily functions. So you know that the average adult body has 50 to 65% comprised of water, and it's stored with like lymphatic fluid and extracellular fluid in this interstitium, which kind of flows through the entire body and connects all of our organs together. So this is important because our lymph cells or the lymph fluid, it has immune cells in them. So when we get sick, these immune cells are traveling through the interstitium to different areas of the body that are infected to help treat them. And we see that this is how diseases such as cancer can metastasize, because if the little cancer cell breaks off and travels in the interstitium, it can reach other areas of the body. So the interstitium is being highly studied right now as a form of possibly slowing down the progression of cancer.
So the way that we integrate both Eastern and Western medicine in context of the interstitium is, we said that the interstitium was like a network of fluid-filled spaces. So something that Eastern medics have actually found is that acupuncture can actually really help with that fluid flow in the interstitium. And it could cause collagen bundles, this is really specific, but it could basically cause them to rearrange and create channels where fluid can flow much more easily. And then along with that, therapeutic massages such as Tai Chi and yoga could also help with the flow of the interstitial fluids. So it's very interesting how Western and Eastern medicine and doctors from both styles are kind of putting their heads together to figure out what exactly the interstitium is and how we can take care of it. Next slide. I'm going to be talking a little bit about COVID approaches, just to make it a little more applicable to today's time. So as of now, there are over 133 ongoing registered clinical studies on traditional Chinese medicine and integrated with Western medicine. And so actually there's 3 main patent medicines that Western and Eastern doctors are looking at, as well as researchers. And just to briefly go over them, the first one is from the forsythia and honeysuckle flower. The second one is from the honeysuckle flower. And the third one is basically a toxin removing injection that's recently been approved. So these pharmacological studies have actually suggested that Chinese medicine is really effective for treating COVID, which surprised a lot of people who are generally a little closed-minded about integrating Eastern and Western medicine. I know we have a tendency to like favor the style of medicine that we are used to practicing, but it's really interesting how these traditional Chinese herbs and practices have actually been applicable to COVID. Next slide.
So we had talked a little bit earlier about how Western medicine is not as easily accessible due to how expensive it is in terms of in comparison to Eastern medicine. So a way to maybe possibly alleviate this issue is if we had a more universal healthcare system. So a lot of the pharma and biotech companies actually originated in a lot of Eastern countries. However, the way Western areas have integrated them has been in terms of just making a profit. So we see currently that in order to get healthcare, we often have to have health insurance, which we gain through our jobs, and not all jobs have the same level of health insurance. So if you look at the image, depending on what type of health insurance you have, determines how much of your like medical bills that you have to pay. So if you look at the bronze area, it says 60%. So the health insurance will pay 60% of whatever your health costs are, and you have to pay the other 40%. But with how expensive medicine is, even covering that 40% can be too expensive for most people. So healthcare is not as easily accessible to everyone who integrate Western practices. And we see this in recently well, not recently, it was a few months ago, but so when Trump was entered into the hospital for COVID, he had mild symptoms, but he received a lot of these experimental drugs. And I was reading this little article kind of comparing how he received these experimental drugs when he had mild symptoms in comparison to individuals like you and I. If we had COVID and we were to enter the hospital, they usually don't administer those experimental drugs until an individual is coding on the table. And often by the time the individual is coding, it is too late for these drugs to have any effect on their current health issue. So this kind of shows like a disparity between how different individuals receive medical care and the current health system that we have. So I feel like a more universal healthcare system would be more beneficial to ensure that everyone is treated the same, and that like medical practices are not about money and more about actually helping individuals. Oh, you can go to the next slide. Okay, so we have one more breakout room with these 3 questions. So how do you think we should approach the issue of integrating Western and Eastern medicine in medical schools or in hospital systems? And should we even integrate them in the first place? Like, would there be too many issues to integrate them? Or should we even try to integrate them in the US? And what are some issues concerning our current healthcare system, and how can some of these be improved if they can be improved by integrating Eastern and Western medicine? Okay, does anyone have anything that they want to add to this slide?
I can say something. I guess what we were talking about in my group was like, or at least like, so I took a class with Maida actually on it was like the history of global health in like last year, and like I guess kind of what I got from that was like
a lot of like Western medicine, or at least like the way like things are kind of approached in Western medicine, like came from colonial medicine, which appropriated a lot from like Eastern medicine and other forms of like of healing. And I think like when thinking about integrating them in the US, like there should be like some thought to like appropriation and like the fact that like there's a historical presence of that. And like when integrating it, like thinking about like the cultural significance of Eastern medicine and like what that means and trying to like put it within like the US and like make like being, if you're like trying to make it a part of our healthcare system, then like there should be thought and like concern about like that history and like as well as like the cultural significance.
Yeah, I agree. I think Bernie in our group and the breakout room also mentioned how our current healthcare system already has so many issues that trying to integrate it without addressing maybe some of the issues that we have right now may just bring up more issues instead of actually solving anything. Did anyone else have anything they wanted to say or add?
So a
Yeah.
problem. Oh, is someone else?
No, Frida, go ahead. Go ahead,
Okay,
Frida.
okay. So I think another issue in integrating Eastern and Western medicine is like big pharma, because like that would like be taking away like half their business, I guess. And I feel like we know that big pharma has like incentivized doctors to like overprescribe medicine in the past. So I feel like that would be a big barrier to integrating, yeah, capitalism. But yeah, so that was something I had to add.
So to add on, I think a lot of what we're alluding to is just, it's not only the medicine, but the other factors that have to do with the American or like quote unquote American like culture and lifestyle. Because one thing that Hannah and I brought up is with Western medicine, that desire for a prescription and a quick fix goes along with this like fast-paced American type of lifestyle that's like, give me what I need so I can get this problem fixed so I can get on with my life and like work or just take care of all the other things I need to do. And so unless we change like the lifestyle and culture, then I don't think integrating two forms of medicine is going to be effective in the long run.
Something I also want to add is that there are countries, I'm thinking specifically of China, but there are other countries in the region that are also still very involved economically in like quote unquote Western medicine systems. Like there are hundreds of biotech companies that come out of at least just China and Japan. And so it wouldn't just be a challenge in the US, like you would have a problem with it in other places if you were going to talk about capitalism.
Okay, yes, thank you. I completely agree. And that should be the end of our ghU, I'm pretty sure. The next slide says thank you. Yeah, okay, thank you for listening, you guys. And thank you for contributing.
All right, thank you, Nyari and Sara, for such an amazing ghU. Big round of applause to both of you. I'm going to stop my recording.